Hi, I'm Walter. I'm the Dutch mentor. Welcome back to the Smart Performance Podcast, where S stands for self-care, M for mindful growth, A for adaptive problem solving, R for rhythmic operation, T for building a thriving community, and of course, P for performance. I'm really happy to have Amy Fox with me today, all the way from Ireland. And we're going to be talking about a topic that all of you need to be interested in. Not should be, but need to be interested. How to run an effective meeting. I cannot tell you how many hours in my life I have been lost sitting in meetings that were non-value adding. As always, I promise you the next 15 minutes will be action-oriented, things that you can start changing even today. Because if you don't do it today, and if you don't start measuring it, by tomorrow morning you have forgotten about our conversation. So again, welcome to the show. Thank you, Amy, for being here, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much for having me. So as you said, I'm Amy Fox. I run a company called A Fox Consulting. And the whole reason I set up the business is to help people who manage people to be excellent at managing people, which sounds really simple. But the reality is you need to be quite specific and measured about how you do it. And one area that I focus on, and I've written a book about it, is how to have that effective meeting. I really think, similar to yourself, that if you give people actionable steps to bring into their day to day, they're not going to forget it next week or in 3 months down the line, and it will allow them to be their best selves in the workplace.
Yeah, listen, I think that you and I both, as I've spent over 30 years in the non-for-profit, for-profit corporate America, in many meetings. And the number one thing that I always find to be, the hardest piece of the puzzle is that people bringing fresh data to the meeting. And of course, if you sit in a room with scientists, the scientists lose all of the messaging, all of the language, and they just zero in on p-values and want to argue with the fact that the data is no good. And again, how much time is lost in the process, of course. So give us a problem statement from why you started your business. What did you witness? And why did you feel there's a real sense of urgency around this particular topic on running a highly effective meeting?
I think it's as the world gets busier, right? We have less and less time, but there's never been more of a need to collaborate. But it's about, I suppose, using the time in the best way possible. We see things like the meeting before the meeting and agendas going around. Or my favorite thing that I've ever heard, and I think it's I suppose the sole reason I probably wrote the book that I did, which is called Mind the Blind Spot, is I remember asking someone about an agenda item that had been earlier in the month, which they were 3 weeks into the month, and they said to me, I'm just going to keep saying I've no update until it falls off the agenda. And I just thought, my God, how are we running our businesses? Are we not giving people the tools and the accountability to be able to run an effective meeting so that we get things done, people feel autonomous, and that they can, I suppose, be productive and reach their targets throughout the year, and that there's a good level of accountability for people as well. So I break it into three separate areas. Maybe it's my brain, but I believe that anything more than three makes it a little bit harder to implement into an organization.
Yeah, 100% sure that we say never more than five. I too like the 1, 2, and 3 configuration. Is that if you do too many things, nothing happens. If everything is important, nothing is important. And that is something that we really need to drive change around. So again, people come into meetings and sitting there contributing for 5 minutes and listening for 55 minutes while they really don't need to be there is another way of people really wasting people's time. And wasting somebody's time is not being respectful to the people, and being respectful to our people, of course, is a foundational, non-negotiable in any business world, of course. So it is something that is really important. And I love the fact that you wrote the book. I love the fact that you make this a topic of conversation because it is something that we need to be. So talk to me about, now that we understand the problem and the problem is consistent, and I always say, listen, people forget that leadership is a profession, right? And if you go to your bachelor's or master's degree, I dare anyone to point out to me where they learned how to run an effective meeting. You cannot find it, but it is an essential part of leading. So tell me, where would you start with somebody to talk about the foundation and the structure of an effective meeting?
So the number one place to start is, what is the purpose of the meeting? And believe it or not, there are different purposes. And I think we kind of overlook this. So is it a brainstorming innovation meeting where we're throwing out ideas, could be related to R&D? Is it an action orientated meeting? Is it a review meeting? And it's not enough, I suppose, to think about that. You have to actively articulate that to people. And it's not about speaking down to people. It's just about being so clear that there's the minimal amount of room for misunderstanding what's actually going on. Again, we're all human. We have a lot of different things going on. So it's about giving people the best opportunity to, I suppose, participate in the meeting, but to bring their most productive selves there and to use their time well, to be respectful, as you're saying. So that's number one. Start by what is the purpose of the meeting? Is it okay to have a brainstorming meeting where we're not expecting a huge amount of actions to come out of it, or that we're clear about who is going to be taking those actions? And if it is a meeting where you are being innovative and throwing out ideas, are you making it clear in that meeting when you shift from ideas into action then? And a lot of what I'm going to say is going to sound really basic, but if we get the basics right, there's nothing that can hold us back. So we've confirmed and articulated what type of a meeting it is. Then it goes into the actual meeting itself. I'm not going to speak about agendas and that level of detail. I think there are good articles around that, but I'm going to speak about 3 specific moments in the life cycle of a meeting. And the first one is where what I call the lock moment, where you lock a decision in place. What we see an awful lot of the time is a lot of people in a room are waiting for someone else to raise an objection or to ask what we might consider an awkward question. To lock something in, you need to be super clear about what is expected, who owns it, and when it needs to come back into view. And I'm going to come back to that third point in a second. What I would say is it, if there was someone who is a part of this project or decision that wasn't in the room, could you send them an email explaining what is expected of them, and they could totally understand it without context? That's how you know whether or not you've locked something in. The second piece is around accountability. I firmly believe that the royal we should have stayed with the late queen. I think we, in terms of actions and outputs, has no place. It is fine to have a lot of people contributing to something, but there has to be fundamentally one accountable person, and that needs to be said in the room. So it could be Amy is responsible for this and she can lean on her team or this team to support an action. And the third piece, which is, I suppose, a particular passion of mine, is that have you agreed when it's going to come back into view? And Pixar do a beautiful way of doing this, where they actively bring projects back into the room and onto the table for review when they're mid-development. They're not waiting until a deadline comes to present something that might not be finished, that still requires a bit of data or validation. They are actively collaborating on it, and one person is bringing it back into view the whole time.
Thank you for laying that out. And I think that is something that's very attainable, but it's really rooted in behavior. And I find always that people's behavior is where we fall short, right? Is that people can do things well for 1 week, and then the next time they come back, they make a big mess out of it again. The other thing is too that I think that bringing focus to that meeting and a purpose to that meeting, and setting the meeting up for 30 minutes from the top of the hour to the bottom of the hour. So even if the meeting goes 40 minutes, at least you still have 20 minutes to do something with your time. In healthcare specifically, you'll see meetings for 8 hours a day, and you do nothing else, go from meeting to meeting to meeting. There's no time in between to spend time, quality time on the front line, or to actually take action. And that's not respectful to your people itself. By bringing that focus to it. So I call this the cadence of accountability in my operational rhythm program that I advocate for, and it really has these components into place itself. So I want to go back a little bit to the behavior piece. Because I think that you can come in and tell them exactly what they need to do, but how can you now hardwire that into the infrastructure itself so people will continue to do it? No different than bringing that project back midpoint to do a quick update. How can you get them to establish a cadence of accountability, the rhythm that you're talking about in the meeting, to make sure that this is something that is sustainable over time?
Yeah, so I think it's back to my earlier point of figuring out what kind of meeting you have. Once you make a decision, so if you decide to use this 3-part meeting structure for the life cycle, and a meeting is not just those 30 minutes, right? It goes beyond that in terms of what happens next, the reflection piece, the doing of the work. But if you decide to bring this into how you're going to run your meetings, that's your decision. Then you need to articulate it. And then it's like marketing or branding. You need to say it over and over and over again and make sure people understand what it is, how it works, their role in it, and that you create that environment. And it leads into other really important aspects that I cover within my organization around psychological safety, to create an environment where people can object, to make sure that people have good autonomy, that they, invoking self-determination theory. There's a lot that actually goes into this, but at a very basic level, it's making the decision, making sure everyone is aware of it, and then actively using that throughout the meeting. So if an action is agreed, and we've all sat there with the nodding heads around the room, but not really been quite sure about what's happening next, that people actively put up their hand and say within the meeting, what is going on, who is responsible. I think a lot of people have wanted to remove me from meetings throughout my career because I'm always the one to say, right, I'm just not clear at the moment who's going to take that action and when are we going to look back on it. And it's not to be pedantic, it's to create an environment where you're giving people the best opportunity to do their work and set them up for success. So yeah, it is, the psychological safety piece comes into it, self-determination comes into it as well. And then I suppose that piece around creating environments for people to review actively together.
Yeah. And I think the statistic that we can easily attach to this, that about 70% of the meetings or things we want to do fall short, well short of goal, because we don't do this, right? There's no self-accountability, there's no self-determination, there's no RACI chart, who's responsible, who's accountable, who should be consulted, who should be informed along the way. And it is, and then of course diluting, doing too many things at the same time is also not. Now, measurement is an important piece of the puzzle of having a highly effective meeting. So tell me a little bit about measurement and how you encourage them to embed that into a highly effective meeting.
I think it comes back to how you're setting your goal, doesn't it? So some things will have a numerical measurement and others might feel slightly more intangible around possibly development. But if you set a very clear goal, rather than, a client or a big tender has asked us to do something around sustainability, and we say in a meeting, oh yeah, we should really do something about that. That's not a goal. That is a well-intentioned phrase. So again, looking at what you're trying to achieve and being really clear about it. So what do you need to do? So if it in healthcare would say that to get your next contract with the NHS, you might need to have your scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions done and a net zero pathway, right? Or just an example around sustainability, just based on a client that I've had recently. But you need to say what has to be done, when it has to be done, and when it's going to come back into view, whether that's a review or a deadline. A lot of places, we have project management tools. There's Monday.com, and I won't list them all off because I'm not getting paid to promote them. But you can use a project management tool as long as people have access to it and it's set up in a way that works alongside how people work. You've mentioned human behavior. We're not all built to work and use specific platforms. So we have to make sure that there is a rhythm and a working style in place that people can easily engage with and that it's accessible to them. If you are looking at people to measure or go back against their goals in a way that doesn't feel intuitive to them, you're going to end up back with that person I spoke about earlier who said, I'm just going to wait till it doesn't come up on the agenda anymore. Eventually someone will decide that it's not going to be an agenda point. You have to create an ecosystem of responsibility and accountability that's intuitive to humans.
Yeah, and you're spot on that not everybody is the same. So you do same thing as in the meetings itself. You have an introvert and extrovert. Both can add real value, but if the leader doesn't set the stage for both of them to contribute, you're going to miss something, right? And that missing piece could be really vital. Yeah, measurement. What I've seen too often is people are measuring outcomes, but not the drivers. And I think that people have a really difficult time differentiating between the two, and that's a topic on its own that we could talk about. But it is critically important. If you don't measure it, it's unlikely to get done. It falls right back into that category of 70%. And of course, if you assign it to somebody who's to report back to it, I love connecting the daily huddle methodology, the 5 or 10 minutes of looking at the drivers on the local level so they can report back on that weekly meeting or that weekly cadence. Too often people meet on a monthly basis and then it becomes an outcome and really not actionable. And that again leads itself again back to that 70%. So interesting conversation. So we have definitely some actionable. So summarize for me in a couple of minutes, where do people need to start? What do they need to do? And then tell us where we can find you.
100%. So when it comes to having the most successful meeting possible, you need to identify and articulate the purpose of the meeting. So innovation, action-oriented review meeting. During the meeting, then you need to make sure that you're really clear around when is the lock moment. So you need to articulate what needs to be done by who and by when. Make sure that the accountable person understands it, whether it's through a RACI or other mechanisms, and then making sure the review point, whether it's a deadline or a review in advance of execution, is set in stone and people understand when that point is going to be, so they can be set up for success. If people are looking for more information from me, you can find me on afox.ie or connect with me on LinkedIn as well. It's just my name, Amy Fox.
Sounds like a good plan to me. That's a way to execute. Now, of course, how do we, we can lead a horse to water. We can't make him drink it, right? Again, to the audience, listen, this is really valuable information. Just starting off at number one, right? Having pure focus of what is the meeting all about? What's the intention? Making sure that you have the right people on the right roles sitting around the table who have not only the skills, knowledge, and abilities, but also the time to give their very best at that meeting. And I say, be hyper focused, try to do it, for 30 minutes rather than for 60 minutes. And if somebody is not needed in the room any longer, let them go back to work and do the things that they do best. Again, measure it, get the outcomes, and that's where the human behavior factor comes into play. You have to do it over and over and over again to make that a new normal for the organization itself. All right, Amy, give me a closing thought, a parting thought for the audience today.
Parting thought based on something that you said a little bit earlier is around the daily huddle versus the monthly meeting. What I would say to people is it's that I suppose begin with the end in mind. So your daily huddle is probably for operational, task driven, tactical items. That's really important. That's going to be different from the bi-weekly, weekly or monthly reviews that you have with people, that ring fence time where you can focus on the strategic goals and the development of your people. Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to create is a high-performing workplace where you can engage and retain your employees.
Well said. Don't need to add anything else to that. So to all of you listening, again, take meaningful action on the things that we just talked about today. Don't wait until tomorrow. Start making incremental changes to your program today. If you want to reach out, of course, I encourage you to find Amy on her website or on LinkedIn account. It will be in the show notes as well. You can always reach out to me at thedutchmentor.com. I would encourage you to take the DNA Leadership Archetype free assessment. First, start learning about yourself, who you are as a leader, and then, of course, come for a conversation and see how we can help you to become the thriving leader that not only your team needs, but your patients or whatever function you're trying to carry out needs from you. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you again in the next episode. Amy, thank you very much for being here. And since it's almost tea time, I think, in England, I hope you enjoy a cup of tea or have a great evening. And thank you very much for joining me in the show today.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Thank you.